This is a handmade copper vat. I think it's 500 liters with 240 liters of milk in it, being heated kind of slowly without stirring, and rennet being added and stirred in with the kind of ubiquitous dustpan thing that so many cheesemakers use. This one's made out of wood. And while the cheese is setting, the cows are let out. You can see them heading out to pasture. And slowly the curd is cut with the harp style curd cutting that's used commonly for alpine cheeses. Slowly at first and then faster, and the curds are cut down to a fairly small size, as large as a black bean, I would say. The cream was pulled off the top of this milk, which reduced the fat from 2 to 3% and will obviously give you less cheese in the end. One thing that really impresses me with the way this cheese is being made is there's no pH meter. It's all kind of done by feel, and very little acid developed. The curd still tasted sweet when it was hooped. So there you can see the thermometer and the agitator, and then the rest of the make room, including a butter churn. So after the whey is pulled off, the mass of curd is allowed to settle in the bottom of the vat, and then it's cut in half. There's going to be 2 cheeses made. So he's kind of compiling this curd mass into 2 portions that will become 2 cheeses weighing maybe 15 pounds while fresh. Cheese making can be backbreaking work, and I've noticed that cheesemakers have kind of a certain stance, a way of keeping their back straight while doing this awkward bending over and lifting and manipulating. So Simone here is now taking the cheesecloth in his teeth, the back of his teeth, and sliding that cheesecloth underneath the curd mass. This is a typical procedure for these large alpine cheeses. And this particular cheese, Fontina, is kind of a semi-firm washed rind cheese. You can see the hoop there with a band around it, which can be tightened and set at a variable diameter, and the curd sticks just above the top of that plastic ring, and then pressure is applied on this really cool wooden press. I'm really impressed with the amount of wood that you see in cheese rooms in Europe. It's kind of something that isn't done in America because it's considered unhygienic, but there's obviously a long track record of this stuff being used. So the last of the whey being drained off. Cheese making is very similar everywhere in the world. You make the cheese and you clean up, polish this vat. He says that you have to get the whey out and get it cleaned pretty quickly, or else it will start to turn green from the minerals in the milk reacting with the copper. The beautiful view outside, some chickens, and then the calves out in their little barn. This is inside the mine where all this DOP Fontina is aged, and you'll see a guy right there washing the wheels with a machine that brushes and sprays water on them. And then this guy standing up here kind of doing the same thing but more manually on like a little turntable. So how they wash this cheese is by taking it off the rack, salting one side like with dry salt sprinkled on, and then once that salt has absorbed, they wash it with brine. I'm not sure how strong the brine is, but I would imagine around 3%. And then it's placed back on the shelf. And they do this frequently at first and then less frequently. This robot goes along, pulls shelves off, and flips wheels every few days when they're not being washed. So it's just crazy to see this process automated and to see a cave full of just one cheese. It didn't have the smell that I associate with cheese aging spaces. There's usually a moldy smell, but these cheeses don't get a lot of mold on them. The high level of salt cultivates what's called a smear, which is the orange sticky rind, and it's mainly bacteria, corniform bacteria such as bee linens, but there's a whole community of microorganisms, including the geotrichum, which comes in on top as a white dusting. And they also had very good airflow, probably to get rid of the ammonia, and wash-rind cheeses in general just require a good amount of airflow. So yeah, I was tripping. It was a crazy experience. This is the make process for tomme de Capra. Right there I'm adding kefir that had fermented in a refrigerator for 2 days, along with all its grains. It's a huge amount of grains, rinsing them off. And so the kefir serves as the starter culture. It is a community of bacteria and yeast that gloms onto those grains. The grains are the 3D matrix upon which the community carries itself. And I'm now feeding those grains with warm milk, the last of the milk from this morning's milking. The milk is heated and set with Capra in it, and then the curd is cut into these smaller curds and will eventually be hooped on this draining table. And then you'll get a little view out the window of kind of like a small stone house. So this vat is really nice. It's made in Slovenia. It's kind of annoying that it has this protective lid, but you can see me checking on the curds there. And those lids, like that cage, is really common in Italy. I saw them a lot, but it was a really cool vat to work with. It both heats and cools milk, so it can serve as a bulk tank or a vat for making cheese. And here we are hooping the curd into, I think, 12 of those tomme baskets that make a nice truckle, and then into a rectangular log for any overflow curd. So this cheese is made by the same producer as the tipo Fontina that I showed in earlier videos, but at different sites. So this is the lower farm where they have a very modern facility, and then the tipo Fontina is made up on an Alpage in a off-grid like chateau, and it's very rustic without a lot of these amenities. But both cheeses are aged in the same space, and I'm really interested in the people who are bridging the gap between modern and traditional cheese making. I don't think it's an either or proposition, and I'm actually becoming hesitant to even use the word traditional, because what does that even mean? Who decides what traditional cheese is? Cheese making is in many ways a cultural practice adapted to a specific place, but it continues to adapt, and we can't ask cheesemakers or anyone to stay in the past without adapting to modern times. On steeper slopes, this machine, which is kind of like a set of hair trimmers, is used to cut, while down below where it's flat, the tractor is used, and most of the field is split into terraces to enable the tractor to come in. Then after the hay has dried for a day in the sun, it is made into lines. So that machine kind of throws it into a line, and then you also have to come by and rake it so that you can come by with this tractor right here, which has these teeth that are spinning on the back, and it's pushing the hay up and in, as you can see right there, and it just builds up in the back. And then you come back and rake the excess, pick it up again, and then drive it back to the barn where it's going to be stored loose. So I got to ride on back, or on top. That was pretty cool. And then the big pile is unloaded and then thrown onto this conveyor belt, which takes it up and into the barn where there's a second conveyor belt, which you can shift where it is dropping the hay. And this is definitely a lot of work. even with all the automation, making hay is a huge amount of labor, but it's the idea of taking the summer's bounty of grass and storing it for the winter so that you can feed your animals. And then up inside the hayloft, where it is all stored, you have to move it from this big pile underneath the conveyor over into the sides and corners and kind of like stomp it down with your feet. And it's like gonna get filled up pretty much to the brim